Good morning, Radiant. We are so happy to have you with us this morning. Let's get ready to worship.
For I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. For I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Know the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. Yes, you have. And I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. Yes. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, come after me. No wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, come after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, come after me. There's no shadow you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. Yeah. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. No. the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises, so will I. So will I. And God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. For once you have spoken, all nature and science follow the sound of your voice. And as you speak, 100 billion creatures catch your breath, evolving in pursuit of what you said. If it all reveals your nature, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you say. Every painted sky, a canvas of your grace. If creation still obeys you, so will I. So will I. So will I. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the winds go where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our prayers still fall shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. God of salvation, chase down my heart and all of my failure and pride. On a hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 If you left the grave behind you, so will I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every part designed in a work of art called love. If you gladly chose surrender, so will I can see your heart in a billion different ways. Every precious one, the child you died to save. If you gave your life to love them, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But what measure could amount to your desire? You're the one who never leaves the one behind. You're the one who never leaves the one behind. No, no. You're the one who never leaves the one behind. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sum of all our praises still falls shy, then we'll sing again 100 billion times. If the stars were made to worship, so will I. Wake up high. If the mountains bow in reverence, so will I. Oh, wake up high. If the oceans roar your greatness, so will I. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes where you send it, so will I. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. All our praises still fall shy, and we'll sing again 100 billion times. Oh, you're so worthy. You're so worthy. You're so worthy. You're so worthy.
Part of our vision for 2020 is to seek the Lord of harvest through prayer and intercession. This year, we're hosting 12 nights where we come together to pray and worship once a month. Our next prayer meeting is this Tuesday, June 30th at 7:45 p.m. in Nolensville. For the address, you can message us on social media or contact your watch party host. If you've recently started attending Radiant and are interested in hearing more about us, we encourage you to sign up for our online Be Radiant class tonight at 7:30. Our Be Radiant class is designed to introduce you to who we are, why we exist, and our heartbeat so that you can get better acquainted with Radiant and be more involved. If you'd like to sign up, Registration is required, so you can go to our website or email us at hello@radiantnashville.church. Here at Radiant, we are firm believers that it is better to give than to receive, and we are seeing the fruit of your continued generosity in our community and in our ministry. If you would like to give, there are 2 ways that you can do so. One is by heading to our website and clicking the Give tab, and the other is by texting Give to the number on the screen.
Well, hey, good morning, Radiant Church. Thank you so much for joining us today. And wherever you're joining us, whether it's from the kitchen or the living room or a car, whoever you might be with, I know that there's some watch parties that are gathering in homes that have been the past few weeks. Shout out and holler to all the watch parties. Love what's been taking place in those communities and homes. And I just want to welcome you to Radiant Church, and glad you're tuning in this morning. The summer has officially begun. And man, there is so much that's been ushered in this season, this summer. And we have been having, as a church, some crucial conversations. 2 weeks ago, we started a series around the topic of racism, reconciliation, and diversity. And everyone everywhere in the culture is having this conversation. And the truth is that even if the culture wasn't having this conversation, this is a conversation that needs to happen, that's essential, that should happen in the center of the church. And today I'm excited to begin part 3 of a 4-part series in this Crucial Conversation series. And I'm so excited to introduce to you Dr. Cedric Williams. Dr. Cedric Williams is a clinical psychologist. He's a consulting psychologist. He is the CEO and founder of Legacy Consulting Group. And Cedric is serves actively in the military. He served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's currently a captain in the Army. He's about to be a major in the Army. He's a former pastor, and amongst many other things, and as incredible as those titles and those accomplishments are that I just previously mentioned about him, what means most to me for Cedric is that he's my friend. We've been friends for 16 years. And man, we have a lot of fun memories together. We're going to share a few of those as we begin our conversation. But Cedric and I got into ministry together back in the day. We were serving as college pastors, and ever since that day, we've been boys. And I'm so excited for you to hear from him today. And Cedric is finding himself in influential places because I believe he's becoming a voice around the topic of multicultural competence, which you're going to hear about this week and next week, amongst other things, racism, diversity, and he is so helpful and so wise, and it's a privilege that we get to hear from him today. I was so honored and, man, certainly challenged to sit down with him to have a conversation around this topic. And so I just want to encourage you and remind you what we've been saying in this series is that hurt must be heard before it's healed. And we just believe that conversation is the conduit to change and transformation. And so he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. And what the Spirit is saying to the church right now is to listen, is to gain wisdom, is to get knowledge. And I just pray that you would do that. And just because you hear something hard doesn't mean it's not true. Matter of fact, some of the truest things we hear in life will be the hardest things that we hear. And I think you're going to hear some hard things this week and next week, but it's going to be life-giving. And I pray and hope that you would receive it today. So prepare your hearts, prepare your notes as we enter into part 3 in Crucial Conversations. I'll see you on the other side. Cedric, what's up, man? Love you. Thanks for being here. And thanks for taking time to have this conversation with me. And I was just thinking, we've been friends. We've been friends for a while.
15 years.
15 years, 16 years.
Yeah, 15 years, man.
It's a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
So we've been friends. We've cried together. We've laughed together. We've smashed some really good food together. We've done a lot together.
We've done a lot of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
We stood with each other on our wedding days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just a little icebreaker. Any stories or anything come to mind as you go back and turn the page 15 or 16 years? Any funny conversations that we've had?
I think that probably the most
salient memories that I have with you are probably on the dance floor. Yeah, well, yeah, I would probably say that that's probably the most salient. The most salient, but yeah.
When you look at, it seemed as if there was this kind of this confluence of names like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, all happening within that within weeks. I feel like, for me, when I looked out and I listened and I saw and I observed, something was, to me, unique. And if it's true that there was something unique and different about it, what would you say to that? Why did that feel different? Did it feel different to you in the sense of the response to people either protesting or people observing or people grieving, people coming alongside, people having an ear to listen? There was just something in that moment, in those moments, where all those kind of came together. And I'm just mentioning just a few names.
Yeah, just a few.
Just a few. What was different? What was unique?
So I think part of the reason why it reached national news the way that it did was that we had come from a place where COVID happened in February and March.
Right.
All right, we saw globally what was happening in December, January timeframe, and then it continued to come closer on the national stage. So you have people who are isolated; they're at home. Ahmaud Arbery was killed in February, right? We didn't hear about it until later on, right? Until weeks later, which is a whole nother thing. The fact that he was killed, his family has to deal with that in isolation, right? No national attention, initially. But what is different about these events is that Ahmaud Arbery was killed by essentially a civilian vigilante. Breonna Taylor was killed by the police officers or SWAT team or whatever that comes into her home, right? And it's the same thing with George Floyd. So you have these structures of civilian, you have a structure of a government system, right? That's a part of that, or a state system, local municipals, and then in addition, which we didn't talk about, name was the Christian Cooper incident in New York City, where this man is bird watching. He's bird watching, and really confirming this incident of like a lot of black men. I can speak for myself. Fears of you can literally be minding your own business and still be viewed and perceived as a threat. This person was extremely non-threatening. He's bird watching, and actually this woman was wrong. And essentially pulled out her conjuring of, all of her social learned bag of tricks in order to elicit this fear, her voice. This is what this person's doing, So I think that all of those that are coming off of COVID with, the high unemployment, people are home, people are dialed in such a small time frame was one of the reasons why it contributed to getting such great national attention. But as you mentioned and what we talked about earlier, this is not new.
Right. So let me take that question a step further, and thank you for self-disclosing that. You have a beautiful family. You have a son and a daughter, and there's certain preparatory conversations that parents are going to have with their children. What kind of conversations that would be unique to your home and to the home of a black family in America? What kind of conversations do you have to already have on your radar that when my son or daughter gets to a certain age and they're at some kind of age of accountability, or when things are no longer conceptual, but they can take it as concrete truth that they need to understand this? What are those conversations like? Maybe what have you had conversations already with your children? And then what conversations down the road do you, regardless of where they're at, you're going to have these conversations with them? And then maybe what were the conversations that your parents had with you when you were growing up?
Yeah, good question. like try to break that down.
Yeah.
There's so many thoughts, that are streaming through my head when you ask that question,
Yeah.
because I think it's important to know that, Black children don't have the luxury of not understanding racism, right? That's a privilege. Oh, well, having the discussion of when do we talk about this? Well, the reality, you experience it, right? You experience it. My child, I have a kindergartner, I have a first grader. That even this year they got on a bus and a girl said that they couldn't sit there because Black people quit all the time. And so like when my daughter comes off of the bus and asks about this, what does this mean? We don't have the luxury of saying, hey, well, let me talk to you about this. Like as a parent, you never want your child to get hurt. You never want your child to feel like they are less than and other.
Yeah.
Right? And when they experience that, you have to jump in. You have to be able to talk and to communicate these things, that there's hatred and there's evil, there's sin, right? That drives a lot of factors in human interaction. And so, as far as conversations, we just talk about real life things, like everything from like, this is why people don't like the color of your skin, and this is how ignorant it is, and this is how it manifests, right? Those are conversations that we have to have. We must have. We are not going to, just not have those types of conversations.
Right.
Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book, and he wrote a book to his son. And one of the things that I think he said that was so powerful was, teaching your kids that you have to work hard, twice as hard, is essentially telling them that you need to expect twice as or half as much, right? So growing up, that was my message. My dad would tell me, you got to work twice as hard to be seen. Like, well, in the reality is it's like, I don't want to tell my kid that he have to work twice as hard to be seen as equal.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that, right? Because it is setting him up to think that like, well, if I have to work twice as hard, then am I supposed to expect half as much, right? I want my kids to live in a world that sees them for the human beings that they are, to sees them, not only accepts them or has tolerance, but embraces and loves them, right? And their beautiful Black skin. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And I think that that's important. Yeah. It's really important.
Thank you again for disclosing that. I think that is so crucial. Coming back to that word, that there's an understanding of that there's context, that we actually step into the shoes of somebody else and actually just take a moment to learn and to listen. Yeah. And along those lines, just as you were sharing, when we talk about the race debate or the lack of awareness that people in the white community have, and even I would even say the lack of willingness to be a part of the solution. Why would you, Cedric, talking about being on the other side of the table, why is there such a stronghold in our nation when it comes to racism? Like, how would you respond to that? And then maybe in the midst of that, you can help us better, because you use the word microaggressions. Maybe you can help us better understand what is racism, and what that looks like.
So I would say historically, a lot of times, what I've experienced is that white people get really up in arms when the word racism is getting thrown out. And the reason being is that when they think of, like, I don't say the N-word, I don't, I'm not a part of the Ku Klux Klan, I'm not a part of a hate group, I'm not on social media saying the N-word or writing the N-word, so like, I'm not racist, right? And I think that one of the things with that is that all of those things that I just named are socially unacceptable behaviors. But there's also a lot of other racially charged behaviors that are socially acceptable. You think about hiring discrimination, discrimination when it comes to lending at banks, racial profiling, being complicitly silent, is a racist act when you, for centuries, say nothing. right? So expanding the definition of what is racism, I think is helpful, because there's socially unacceptable behavior, which is like the Klan, which I think that most people think about, right? But there's all of these other socially acceptable behaviors that are racist. And I think that that's where people need to expand their understanding of what is racism, right?
Get understanding, get
Get
knowledge.
understanding. Not challenging racial jokes when you're at your table, or letting your very older generation say these things. Oh, well, that's okay. Like, they're just 70. Or like, no, you can still learn. We still, we have to look at those things: voting discrimination, gerrymandering, school districting, right? All of these things, denying white privilege, for that matter. Like, all of these things, in my mind, or that expansion of what is racism, right? And so I think that hopefully that will help people to see, like,
because there's probably been a narrow definition. You see something on TV and you deem that as a racial act, and therefore you would say, I would never do that. I have never done that.
So therefore I'm not racist.
Therefore I'm not.
I'm not walking around with bed sheets or something like that. So I'm not, I'm not racist. But the reality is that there's so much more what can be considered in my mind of something that is actively being racist, or passively being racist by being complicitly silent too.
Let me ask you this question. I think when it comes to our intentions, can always be good, but yet still hurt someone who is black or brown. And I think it's integral. It's so important that we are open to the fact that even our good intentions doesn't prevent damage. And so how would you help us, Cedric? How would you help me understand coming with having and gaining understanding that even good intentions sometimes can, why I need to be able to identify, even in the midst of good intentions, how sometimes gaining understanding is good to help prevent any further damaging. I don't know how you would you'd speak to that, or maybe you have an example.
The way that I think about it like as a psychologist, when I meet with people, like, on a weekly basis, I'm, in a therapy session with them. And when I speak with clients or something like that, what we call it is rupture and repair. So as a therapist, if I say something to a client and maybe I see that their face changes, or they fold their hands, or they kind of lean back, or they don't really like it, or they look down, right? There's something that shifts in the room. So what I would call that is a rupture.
That's good.
And so the way that I try to go about it is say, hey, I noticed that I just said something and your face changed, you folded your arms. I'm noticing that there's something that's happening. I'm wondering if I'm being curious about me if saying something that was offensive, right? And the hope is that you can have a rupture, but you can also have a repair, right? In order to clear up and understand that, like, I didn't mean to, so my intentions were pure, but there was still pain, right? And so instead of focusing on, well, I didn't mean to, so they should get over it, that's not the point. The point is to understanding how I ruptured, to be able to, in theological terms, we would say repent of that rupture, and then to be able to repair, right? And so I think that that's what's important. You can have the best intentions, but still be hurtful. And when you recognize and have that awareness heightened that you did something that was hurtful, how do you step in and actually say, hey, this is not okay, I did something, and how can we move forward to change it, right? Instead of saying, oh, like, he's sensitive. You need to get over it. Like, oh, come on, I didn't even mean to say that. That's not what I meant. No, the act happened. How will you repair it? And taking time for that.
So without going down a long historical trail, when you talk about Black history and the significant events that have taken place over really the course of humanity, without doing all the homework for us, what would you say for us that when it comes to maybe historical, cultural tipping points that were significant, that you would say, hey, I would look at this particular date or this particular event when it comes to either the Emancipation Proclamation, Jim Crow law, Civil Rights Movement, whatever that might be, what would you say, hey, here's a great starting point for you to to grow in your competence?
Yeah.
What would you put in front of us? Maybe just one or two things.
One or two things. Wow, that's a good question.
I know there's a lot, and
Well, what I would say is, for Christians, I would say, in the beginning, God.
it's a great starting point.
I would start there.
Yeah.
In the beginning, God. In the humanity, right, that was made from God, for one. And then I would come to the acknowledgement in our cultural context is that Black history does not start with slavery.
Wow.
1619 is a date here.
Wow.
Black history starts a long time before that. We think about the Kemets and Kemet spirituality. We think about Egypt and Ethiopia. It's like our history is not in chains. That's not the first part of our history.
So helpful.
And so when people think about, Emancipation Proclamation and Jim Crow laws, yeah, that's very recent history.
Right.
But our history as Black people starts way before that. Yeah. And so if the narrative that we just came to be on a boat, right? And we started in chains and slaves and master and slave relationship, we're missing it. Yeah. Right? This goes back to that, that mono view of a lot of American Christianity.
Very truncated.
Well, it's the reality is just that most Christians are not American in the globe, right? Christianity is a global, right? It is not just American conservative, white, evangelical. And so being able to expand that understanding, it's the same thing with historical perspective of Black history. Black history didn't start in 1619. And I think that that's really important for people to know. Yeah. So start in the beginning, God. Yeah. And then I would move to the place of where did Black spirituality come from? Right? Why do we have spirituals, the songs? Where did those come from? Those weren't just started in the cotton fields in the South. That's from a lot of our past, right? Is Kemetic spirituality. I mean, it's a lineage.
Yeah. Right. Well, there's so much there, and so much learning we need to do, and thank you for helping us starting the narrative at the right starting point. In the beginning, God. And I'm only bringing this up because, for me as a pastor, and for those who are watching, who are brothers and sisters in Jesus, who are Christians, right now, I bring up the civil rights movement because that was something that was located in the church. I mean, people would meet in churches before a protest march would happen. The pulpit kind of became the platform, if you will, for a lot of the civil rights movement leaders, and so it began in the church. But what I've been seeing, and just as I have been reading, and as I have learned about just the history of how we've gotten to this place and the role of the church in this place. The civil rights movement was something that I would say started in the church, but really never made its way back in. And so my question for you in the midst of that is, how has the church ignored the cry of those who have suffered racial oppression? The church, we're talking about the church now. How has the church historically maybe even participated and furthered the racial divide? How would you help us with that?
Yeah, I would go two ways, because I think that in some ways, the church, right, American church in particular, has had a voice in civil rights, right? Right. But the Black American church is the church that I'm talking about that's had the largest voice, right, and continued. Yeah. You think about all of the saints and the people who came from different walks of life, Episcopalian, AME, Pentecostal, Catholics, Jewish, there were so many people who came, right? The people who were complicitly silent historically when it comes to the civil rights were white evangelicals.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, how tragic is that?
Yeah.
Not only were
Yeah.
complicitly silent at some points of history, but also were rooted in, this is not as important, and oppositional against it, troublemakers, right? Martin Luther King was, that's was his famous. He's a troublemaker, right? Holding the Bible, justifying why this is not okay, right? And I think that in some ways, so what you spoke to is that the Christian church has an opportunity to step in and say, like, no, we are for justice,
Yes.
and this is unjust,
Right.
and rightfully so. We are going to have people. We're going to start our protest is going to start here with prayer, and right, and we are going to walk, or we're going to march, or and bring that back. Bring that back. Why did it leave? Why did it return? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Or why wasn't it there in the first place if it
Yes.
wasn't?
Yeah.
Right? Because if we're reading the scriptures and we're looking at these things as being a God of justice, I think that that's critical.
Yeah.
And this is, I really do think, as far as multicultural competence and as far as like diversity and celebrating that, right? This is the time for the church. And it's so sad sometimes when you see churches miss it, right? Because you really want, like, wow, you're missing an opportunity for justice, not just Black lives. That's not like, oh, well, that's, we don't want to be, that's what culture says. Like, you're a part of that.
You are.
You're not a bystander.
Right.
Right?
We're all
We think about Stanley Hauerwas and talking about the positions that we have towards culture. And every Christian, every church has to ask themselves, where do you stand with that culture? Right? Is the culture just against you? Is that just like we run away from that? Like, are we also a part of that? And do something within it? Right? As a participant. Those are big questions that I think that every pastor has to come and reckon with. And if you're not reckoning with it, you're complicitly silent in it.
Well, that's a wrap for part 3 in this Crucial Conversation series, and I'm so encouraged, so enlightened just by my time with Cedric. And we have one more part to go. That was just part 1 of part 2 with my conversation in Cedric. So we're going to pick up where we left off next week. But as far as this week goes, I don't want you to go anywhere quite yet. I want you to continue the dialogue. And I just want to ask you, what is the Holy Spirit saying to you? What are some things that were shared that, man, maybe kind of pricked your heart or stirred in your heart? Maybe you're a little uncomfortable right now. Don't assume that that's the enemy. That could be the Holy Spirit doing some things inside of you right now on this topic of racism, reconciliation, and diversity. Matter of fact, if you're in a watch party right now, I just want you to open up and continue the dialogue, having holy conversation around this. There's going to be some questions that will come up on the screen just to kind of prompt and instigate that discussion. And I just want to encourage you, continue to have ears to hear what the Spirit is saying to the church, but what He's saying to you. Love you. Be radiant, and thank you so much for joining us in this Crucial Conversations series. You are loved.